I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. Mushrooms don't get much respect, but they add unique flavors to food. What's more, they have healing properties. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
We're talking today with the editor of the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook. It has tempting recipes from mushrooms gathered in the wild, along with mushrooms you can find in your neighborhood grocery or farmer's market.
Many other cultures have prized mushrooms for centuries. Truffles, for example, are worth their weight in gold.
Dr. Tirone Lodog is one of the country's leading experts on botanical medicines. She'll share her knowledge about the medicinal activity of mushrooms.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, the culinary and curative properties of mushrooms.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines, one of the mysteries of the COVID-19 pandemic is the condition known as long COVID. Doctors sometimes call it post-acute sequelae of COVID, and they don't understand it very well. To get the perspective from the patients themselves, one group of researchers turned to a patient advocacy group called Survivor Corps. These patients provided emails and Facebook comments about one distinctive aspect of their experience: internal tremors or sensations of vibration. Some patients refer to it as whole body buzzing. Many report extreme fatigue and trouble exercising, even if they were athletic before their infection. Frequently, they have episodes of extreme pain. Others have difficulties with memory or concentration, sometimes termed brain fog. This study focused on tremors and vibrations. Doctors have not been able to find effective treatments for these symptoms. Even more troubling, many patients have found it difficult to get healthcare providers to take their symptoms seriously. The authors conclude, overall, these patient narratives described intense suffering, and there is still no diagnosis or treatment available.
One of the more common and distressing symptoms of post-acute sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 infection is brain fog. Even after relatively mild cases, patients report cognitive deficits such as short-term memory problems, trouble concentrating, difficulty making decisions, confusion, mental fatigue, and trouble retrieving words. It's estimated that 20 to 30% of the people who catch COVID-19 will experience brain fog. Researchers looked for a biological marker among patients suffering from this condition. They found changes in the cerebrospinal fluid among individuals with new cognitive symptoms. People without cognitive dysfunction did not demonstrate these biological markers in their spinal fluid. The investigators believe that the biomarkers indicate brain inflammation.
The Mediterranean diet has an excellent reputation for helping people live a longer, healthier life. However, not all studies show that it really makes a difference. A study from Tuscany, Italy, suggests that measuring biomarkers in urine and blood offers a more sensitive way than food frequency questionnaires of determining how well people actually follow the regimen. This eating pattern is characterized by ample vegetables and fruits, limited amounts of red meat and dairy products, and the use of olive oil as the principal fat. The In Chianti study followed 642 volunteers for 20 years. All the participants were at least 65 years old at the start of the study. The researchers measured total polyphenols and resveratrol in the urine and blood levels of carotenoids, selenium, vitamin B12, and omega-3 fats. During the 2 decades of follow-up, 435 of the participants died. Those with the highest levels of these biomarkers were 28% less likely to die during that time. They were 40% less likely to die of cardiovascular causes, but the risk of dying from cancer was unchanged. These findings reinforce the value of a Mediterranean diet and suggest that measuring biomarkers might help people better assess how well they're following the guidelines.
Have you or someone you know been binging on Netflix videos or some other engaging television shows? A systematic review and meta-analysis reports that people who watch a lot of television are at greater risk for developing venous thromboembolism, or VTE. These are blood clots that form in the deep veins of the legs and can travel to the lungs to cause pulmonary embolisms. The authors analyzed data from 3 prospective cohort studies involving over 130,000 participants. The average age was about 54 to 65 at the start of the studies. People were followed for 5 to 20 years. The researchers found that people who watched 4 hours a day or more were 35% more likely to develop a blood clot in their legs. That was in comparison to people who watched 2.5 hours a day or less. One way to reduce the risk might be to stand up and walk around every 30 minutes or so, or use a stationary bike or a treadmill while watching. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Do you like fungi, or are you suspicious of mushrooms that grow in manure? Many people treasure mushrooms. In fact, truffles, which are a type of fungus, are prized in Europe and extremely pricey. The Appalachian truffle, Tuber canaliculatum, is especially prized. T-can grows on tree roots in remote parts of the Appalachian Mountains. Why do people get so excited about truffles? Should we be enthusiastic about other types of mushrooms as well?
To learn more about mushrooms, we have 2 guests today. Later in the show, we'll talk with Dr. Tyrone Lowdog about the medicinal properties of mushrooms like reishi, lion's mane, and shiitakes. But first, we turn to Eugenia Bone, a nationally known nature and food writer. She's the former president of the New York Mycological Association and a member of the National Association of Science Writers. Eugenia Bone has published several books, including the James Beard-nominated Well Preserved. She's also the author of Mycophilia, Revelations from the Weird World of Mushrooms, and the editor of the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Eugenia Bone.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Eugenia, we have looked at a lot of wonderful cookbooks over the decades because we like to think of food as a keystone of good health. But Fantastic Fungi, wow, it's one of the most beautiful cookbooks we have ever seen. And I guess my first question is, how did you decide to create a cookbook all about mushrooms?
Oh, well, thank you for those kind words. The story behind making this book is pretty far out. Louis Schwartzberg made a film called Fantastic Fungi, and I had a cameo in it. And last year, about this time, well, it was really in the summer of 2020, he contacted me and he said, I want to do a cookbook. I want you to do a cookbook. And I was like, I don't really see why, or we need a Eugenia Bone mushroom cookbook. And then it occurred to me, Louis' operating metaphor in the movie and in subsequent projects he's been involved in is that mycelium, specifically mycorrhizal mycelium, is a metaphor for community action, how we all do better when we help each other. And it hit me, why don't we do a community cookbook? There are mycophiles all over the country, UK, well, all over the world, really. And no one is better suited to share mushroom recipes than the very people who are mad for them. The foragers, the home cooks, the mycologists. And so we reached out to this community. Many people I knew, many people who got involved as a result of seeing Louis' film. And we solicited recipes from them. And I put together a collection based on those solicitations. And the thing that was so great about doing a community cookbook is that these recipes are so well tested. There are things people actually make for dinner. It completely demystifies mushrooms as a cooking ingredient. And so I loved the idea of not only producing a book of really doable recipes, things you're actually going to want to make, but a book that represented not just a collection of recipes, but a collection of people.
I love it, but I need to go back to your metaphor, and I actually need to have you define a couple of terms that we might not all use every day. You talked about mycorrhizal mycelium, and I hope you'll be able to tell us what that is.
And what's a mycophile?
Okay, let's start with mycophiles. Mycophiles are fungus lovers, and there's a lot of us. We are all over the world, and in the United States, if you go on to the NAMA website, that's the North American Mycological Association website, you can find mycological clubs and associations all over the country in just about every state. And through those clubs, you can go on forays, learn about mushrooms. There's educational and mycophagy events. Mycophagy, by the way, is mushroom eating. And so it's a mycophile. That's the community of mycophiles in short. So what is mycelium? Well, mycelium is like the vegetative part of the fungus. So let's start back a little bit. So a spore is like a very light seed. And when a spore lands on the food that it likes to eat, it will germinate and grow in these long threads, much thinner than a human hair. And these threads will branch and rebranch in every direction that the fungus has food to grow into. Each tip is like a little digestive organ. It emits enzymes that break down foods in its habitat, whether that be a rotten log or in the soil. And then all over the fungal body, it absorbs these nutrients and then it can grow bigger. So this mass of branching threads is called a mycelium. It's that thing you see when you kick open a rotten log and you see all that white spider webby stuff. That's mycelium. So mycelium lives in different kinds of ways. Different fungi, because they live in their food, their habitat tends to be their food, and their lifestyle is the way they eat that food. So mycorrhizal fungi are fungi that connect to the roots of plants, particularly trees, and the fungus scavenges in the soil for nutrients that it trades with the plant for carbon, for sugars that the plant makes as a result of photosynthesis. So it's a mutualistic relationship. The tree needs nutrients. The tree makes its own food, of course, but there's a lot of things the tree needs that it doesn't make, like phosphorus, for example. So the fungus gathers phosphorus and delivers it to the tree, and then the tree emits its sugars, which the fungus uses because it needs carbon to grow. So this mutualistic relationship is one of the things that defines the health of plants, the health of soil. It creates community between this sort of interkingdom community. So it's a beautiful metaphor for the idea that things in nature can help each other for the benefit of both.
Now, Eugenia, you've also mentioned that this is a community cookbook.
Yes.
What is a community cookbook?
Well, I'm sure you've seen them before, and so have your listeners. If you've ever participated in a garden club, for example, and the garden club puts out a cookbook with recipes from its members. Well, our community is a very big community of folks who are fascinated by mushrooms, who love to eat them and love to forage for them, and are generally interested in expanding their knowledge about mycology. So our community is really, really large, but has a very intense focus or center of interest, that being mushrooms.
Eugenia, why do you love mushrooms and especially mushroom hunting so much?
I started out getting interested in mushrooms because I have a culinary background. I've written numerous cookbooks, and I've always loved wild foods. I really get a charge out of collecting in the wild. I've also hunted, but I really prefer to find things that hide rather than chase things that flee. So once I started to realize that mushroom hunting was something that I can do in many places in the country, I became increasingly curious about what it would take to find wild mushrooms. And what it takes to find mushrooms is to understand a little bit about why they grow, where they grow. And that led to this wormhole of mycology. And for me, discovering this incredible kingdom of nature, which I hadn't even really considered before. And in the process of learning about mycology, I realized how important fungi are to ecosystems, to every aspect of life on Earth.
Now, Eugenia, you live in New York City, and that's not exactly mushroom country. Where do you go on a mushroom hunt?
Well, first of all, my mentor, Gary Lenkoff, he hunted in Central Park every day. He was the kind of fellow who would, if you were in a parking lot with him, he'd start looking for mushrooms along the edges. They grow everywhere. But if you're after big culinary hauls, which I have to say I'm what they call a pot hunter, then sometimes you have to travel to find them in great quantities. So here in the East, the East Coast of the U.S., where I'm a little limited by the fact that so much land is developed. And you can't really tromp all over somebody's private property and grab the mushrooms off their trees, although I have done that on occasion. So by and large, when I'm on the East Coast, I'll head up into the Catskills and look in the forests there where I'm not trespassing on anyone's property. It's public land. I will also travel to hunt mushrooms. For example, in the spring, I love to I fly into San Francisco, I rent a car, I drive across the Grand Valley and get into the Sierra Nevadas. The spring after a summer previous forest fire, depending on the environment, morels will come up in humongous numbers. And so I go and hunt these bird morels, and then I bring them all back to New York City.
You're listening to Eugenia Bone, a nationally known nature and food writer. She's the former president of the New York Mycological Association and a member of the National Association of Science Writers. Eugenia Bone is the author of Mycophilia, Revelations from the Weird World of Mushrooms, and the editor of the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook.
After the break, we'll find out whether it makes sense to worry about poisonous mushrooms.
Eugenia Bone describes making a spore print. What is that, and what does it tell us?
For a long time, the nutritional contributions of mushrooms were underappreciated, but they are packed with fiber and vitamins and low in calories.
To get the most of their unique aroma and flavor, you have to consume truffles when they're really fresh.
Eugenia Bone will tell you about her favorite truffle recipe.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Are you a mushroom lover? Many people are, and for good reason. Mushrooms are loaded with nutrients, and they add a unique flavor to many dishes. One of my favorites from childhood is mushroom barley soup. You'll find my mother's recipe in the show notes at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're talking about mushrooms with Eugenia Bone, a nationally known nature and food writer. She's the former president of the New York Mycological Association and a member of the National Association of Science Writers. Eugenia Bone is the author of Mycophilia, Revelations from the Weird World of Mushrooms, and the editor of the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook.
Eugenia, you talk about your passion for mushroom hunting and how much you enjoy it. But there are a lot of us who have been kind of scared because we've heard that there are poisonous mushrooms and we better be darn careful. We better know what we're doing if we're going to go out collecting mushrooms. So how do people master the art of collecting healthy mushrooms, good mushrooms, tasty mushrooms, and not get into trouble?
Well, that's a great question because mycophobia is something that exists in this country. We don't have generations of traditions where people went out mushroom hunting with their grandparents, but some of us do. And that's a wonderful gift because learning about mushrooms, in my opinion, is primarily done peer-to-peer. Going out in the woods with somebody who knows and seeing the mushroom in its habitat, seeing a baby mushroom and a full-grown one and mushrooms that have been beaten up by weather or whatever. So you can imagine all of the little nuances and differences that mushroom might manifest as a result of its life cycle. It's much harder to just use pictures, which are just a snapshot of one phase of the mushroom. Sometimes in books, you'll see the mushrooms illustrated from their smallest stage all the way through to full-blown open mushrooms. But by and large, I really do think it benefits all of us on multiple levels to learn about edibles in your region by someone who knows. And the levels include not just accurate identification, recognizing habitat that you're familiar with in your area, but also the amazing relationships that develop as a result of having a mentor in your life. In terms of just being kind of freaked out about finding stuff in the woods and eating it, well, it's the same thing as collecting berries. You know, you're not going to just go out there and get some berries and say, well, it's red, maybe it's good. You know, you're just going to be careful and make sure you know what you're eating. So that process, and when we, in the mushroom clubs, we always tell people, you know, take it easy, take it slow. Learn one mushroom a season, learn one edible, and learn your really poisonous mushrooms first. There's not so many, but they tend to be ubiquitous. So it's good to learn the good and the bad. I mean, that's nature, you know, it's a complete story. So that'll happen if you're out in the woods, because with a mycologist or somebody very knowledgeable, they'll say, "Oh, don't eat that one. By the way, you can always touch a poisonous mushroom; it won't hurt you. You can bring it home. You can do a spore print. You can take pictures of it and identify it. Just don't put it in your mouth."
Now, what is a spore print?
Spore print is one of the ways that you can determine the color of spore, and that's one of the identifying factors of a mushroom. And it's a really beautiful project to do at home because you take the cap of the mushroom and turn it upside down on a piece of paper. I like to do a white piece of paper and a black piece of paper because if the spore are white, they'll show up better on black paper. And you leave them overnight, and the next morning you kind of carefully peel off that mushroom cap, and you'll see these marvelous patterns of the gills and the color, and those patterns would be colored by the spore, which are microscopic, but there's a lot of spore in a mushroom cap, and it'll show this gorgeous pattern of the colored spore. It's an identification technique, but it's also used by artists.
Now, to get back to cooking, I think most home cooks think about mushrooms sort of in a vegetable category. So are mushrooms veggies, or are they different?
Oh, very different. They are in a different kingdom of life: animals, plants, fungi, for the complex organisms. In fact, animals are closer on the tree of life to fungi than either of us are to plants. They might be used similarly to vegetables as a side dish, for example, or something you throw into a melange of other foods. But they are actually have very high quality protein. Not a lot because they're mostly water, but very high quality protein. And so mushrooms can be used as a substitute for meat in your recipes. And there's been some studies that have shown you'll feel full from those mushrooms, even though they're mostly water, because of the high grade protein in them. So they are like a vegetable and like a meat, but they're a thing unto themselves.
Now, you've mentioned the nutritional quality of mushrooms. Can you tell us anything more beyond just the protein content?
Mushrooms are a good to eat food, and they provide a host of vitamins and minerals. They also are a good prebiotic. They have fiber, so when you eat mushrooms, you are also feeding the healthy bacterial symbionts that live in your gut that provide all kinds of healthful services to you. So they're prebiotics. They have minerals, vitamins, fiber, and protein. They're low fat, because they're mostly water. So, and another kind of aspect to encourage, I hope, people to start eating more mushrooms and folding them into their diet for their nutritional value is they are quite sustainable. I mean, mushrooms will often be grown, the ones you see in the supermarket, for example, will often be grown on agricultural waste. They're very low impact on the environment. The white button mushroom, for example, grows out of manure, that's sterilized manure that's placed in these big trays, and the white button grows. You could say that the white button mushroom turns poop into protein in a couple of weeks.
Well, speaking of white button mushrooms, perhaps in a slightly different perspective, but Americans seem to love those white button mushrooms. And I'm wondering about the more exotic varieties, because there are a lot of different kinds of mushrooms, way beyond the kind you might normally find in, a supermarket.
And you mention a lot of them in your Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook.
Yes. Well, there's a wide variety. A number of them are cultivated, and more cultivars seem to be coming on to the market. I mean, when I was young, the only way you could get Grifola frondosa, the maitake, or AKA hen of the woods, was if you went and found them under an old oak tree. But now they're available in markets. People are interested in buying them, and so cultivators are producing them. There are a number, but let me point out that many of the mushrooms that we see in the markets are saprobic. They grow on dead and dying stuff. That's their kind of food lifestyle. The mycorrhizal fungi, the ones that grow in a mutualistic relationship with trees, those are ones that are primarily found in the wild, because to grow them, you'd have to plant a farm of trees and hope that everything goes well underground and you get, boletus or porcini mushrooms or chanterelles.
Or truffles?
Now, that's an interesting point that you made. So truffles are one of the few, if only, I'm trying to think, but maybe the only mycorrhizal fungi that's really farmed. And that's because it's very tricky, first of all, to grow truffles. However, you get so much money for them in the marketplace that it is worth it to those farmers who endeavor to grow them.
What is it about truffles that makes them so prized and so pricey?
Well, truffles are rather rare. They are, first of all, a truffle is a mushroom that evolved to grow underground. For whatever reasons, maybe to avoid environmental stresses. But what happens is that the truffle, or this underground mushroom, it produces all of its spores on the when it's ready to regenerate, right? To get out of its habitat and find a new habitat, it produces all these spore. Well, once these mushrooms evolved to grow underground, they had a problem. Most mushrooms distribute their spore via wind or animals brushing by, stuff like that. So if you got an underground truffle, how's it going to get its spore out there? So what the truffle does is it produces these volatile aromatics, these incredible smells that attract various animal vectors. So there's lots of different kinds of truffles, and some have evolved to attract squirrels, and some have evolved to attract moles. The truffles we love to eat evolved to attract swine, which is why there's this history of the French finding truffles with pigs, because the pigs can smell those aromatics even though they're below ground. Pig digs up the truffle, and then boom, you have this incredible bloom of smell that comes out of the soil. It is mind-blowing. Well, that smell is very sexy. It's like a cross between garlic and potato, and it can have some onion flavors and some armpit scents. It's extremely sensual, but it's all about the aroma. So if you have a truffle, let's say you buy a truffle in a store and you taste it and it's got no oomph, right? No flavor. You're like, what's the big deal? It cost a fortune. Well, that's probably because the truffle is no longer emitting those volatile aromatics. It does that in order to attract animals. Once it's sort of done doing its job of attraction, that's it. It's over. So the truffle is all about its aromatics. That's why when you eat them, like if you go to Italy, for example, this time of year, they'll be grating, right? They'll be slicing very thin white truffle on top of your pasta. It's not cooked. It's all about the pasta is just the delivery vehicle for this incredible aromatic experience.
And of course, it sounds as though the truffle needs to be really very fresh in order to have this aroma still holding to it.
Absolutely. In the case of the white truffle of Italy, which is the most expensive truffle, my cousin Mario in Tuscany, he used to be a truffle hunter. And he told me that you really could only count on the truffle to produce the aromatics for 4 to 7 days. And then it's done. It's not really energy efficient for it to be continually producing these chemicals, right? So if you don't get your truffle pronto, you may not be getting much bang for your buck. I'm going to go and buy a truffle tomorrow for somebody's birthday party. And I called the truffle dealers and I said, when are the truffles coming in to JFK? They said, today, Wednesday. I'm going tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to buy that truffle, and we're going to eat it tomorrow night.
Well, that sounds like a good plan. And tell us about the recipe. Do you have a favorite recipe that uses a truffle?
Well, I really try to keep it simple. And since my personal culinary style is Italian, I will either cook an egg pasta. I have some chanterelles that I collect in the summer, so I might cook that pasta in chanterelle stock rather than in water. And then just slice those truffles on top. That's it. But sometimes I'll put it on top of polenta, soft polenta, just flavored with salt and butter. Other times it's wonderful on top of an egg. When it comes to these truffles, sometimes this neutral palate is the way to go, so that you really don't have other flavors competing with this marvelous and strange truffle aroma.
Now, Eugenia, I have to be honest with you. Mushrooms are one of my comfort foods, and in particular, my mom made a incredible barley mushroom soup, and man, just thinking about it makes my mouth water and brings back wonderful childhood memories. When I was visiting Terry, shortly after we got married in Reading, Pennsylvania, we went out to dinner with her mom and dad and her sisters and brother to Joe's Bar and Grill.
Oh, yeah.
And this was a restaurant that specialized in mushrooms. It was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Joe's Bar and Grill?
Oh, yes. We have 2 recipes in the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook by Jack Zernecki, whose grandfather opened Joe's originally. And it was Jack's father who started, the family loved to hunt mushrooms together. And it was his father who started to introduce mushrooms into the menu. And then Jack was full on, we're going to do a mycophagist's, delight, and we're going to do all mushrooms recipes. And he's continued to do that at his restaurant in the Willamette Valley. And his son is now the chef. So we're talking 4 generations of mushroom chefs who are completely committed to turning people on to the delights of mushroom eating.
Well, I must say, this was quite a long time ago, but this was an amazing meal.
I'm not surprised to hear that. I wish I had, it had been around when I got into mushrooms. But more and more restaurants, I'm noticing, are incorporating seasonal wild mushrooms and a variety of cultivated mushrooms in their menus. It's no longer an oddity or a one-off kind of food. More and more, I think people are seeing, and chefs are experimenting with the array of flavors and the number of ways that mushrooms can be prepared. I mean, I always like to tell people when you're first starting out eating mushrooms, it's best to, trying different species. It's best to just cook a little bit just plain and taste it, see where it's really coming from. And then you can start playing around with adding ingredients, and really the sky's the limit.
Eugenia Bone, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
You've been listening to Eugenia Bone, a nationally known nature and food writer. She's the former president of the New York Mycological Association and a member of the National Association of Science Writers. She's published several books, including the James Beard-nominated Well Preserved. She's also the author of Mycophilia, Revelations from the Weird World of Mushrooms, and the editor of the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook.
After the break, we'll talk with Dr. Tirone Lodog about why mushrooms deserve more respect.
Do mushrooms in the diet offer metabolic benefits as well as nutrition?
Which mushrooms have the most medicinal activity?
Find out what reishi and lion's mane mushrooms have to offer.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia Memory Plus, a cocoflavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
We've been talking about the culinary properties of mushrooms. Now, we're going to change our focus to the medicinal qualities of mushrooms. Many cultures have been using fungi for centuries, if not millennia, to treat a range of health problems.
To get the inside story on the medicinal value of mushrooms, we turn now to Dr. Tirone Lodog. She's a founding member of the American Board of Physician Specialties, American Board of Integrative Medicine, and the Academy of Women's Health. She was elected chair of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Dietary Supplements, Botanicals Expert Committee, and was appointed to the Scientific Advisory Council for the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. Her books include Women's Health in Complementary and Integrative Medicine, Life is Your Best Medicine, and Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and more.
Dr. Lodog, when I think of the healing power of plants, I think about herbs. I think about spices. Some of my favorites: turmeric, thyme, oregano, rosemary, ginger, garlic. Mushrooms, not on my list. I don't think of mushrooms as having healing properties, but I'm wrong. Why do you think that mushrooms don't nearly get as much respect as they deserve?
Well, I think they don't get the respect they deserve in this country. I think in Asia, if you'd grown up in Asia, you'd probably have a high respect for mushrooms and their healing abilities. In this country, people don't, they don't grow up going out foraging for mushrooms. You do see that in Europe. It's much more common. But many of the people I've spoken with, like when I've taken them out on herb walks and they see a mushroom, they're terrified. They're terrified of mushrooms and that they could be poisonous, et cetera. So I just don't think this has been a culture that really is, big on truffles, big on mushrooms, and there may even be a little bit of a mushroom phobia in some cases. But if you look at other parts of the world, especially Asia, you find that these mushrooms, many of them, have been used for thousands of years as medicine. Some are food and, included in food, and others, like reishi, are not. They weren't commonly consumed as food. They were used pretty much as medicine alone. But make no mistake, researchers are deeply invested in looking at the healing properties of certain mushrooms, and the data that's coming out is really quite exciting.
Perhaps you would be good enough to tell us about some of the most exciting data. Which mushrooms are we talking about?
Well, there's a couple. Reishi is one that I personally love it. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful mushroom. And it is one of those that was not used pretty much in food. It was used as medicine. And what we know is that reishi contains a number of these polysaccharides that have a very potent effect on the immune system, really kind of modulating the immune system. So if it's a little not working quite up to snuff, it kind of helps rev it up. And if it's working too much, like, over time, it kind of brings it back down. It has an immunomodulating effect, which is what we want to see, right? And so it can help us increase our resistance to respiratory infections and even help us maybe recover more quickly from them. We also know that it can improve the intestinal barrier. And that's a huge thing because we want to make sure that that barrier function in our intestine is working optimally. 70 to 80% of our immune system is all around the GI tract. And so we want to, that may be one of the keys to reishi. The way it works is really by modulating the microbiota inside of the intestine and enhancing immunity this way. We know that reishi is used a lot in Asia as an adjunctive treatment for cancer. I was recently speaking to a group of integrative oncologists, and they had so many questions about reishi. And what I'll tell you is that we know from reviewing the literature that it does seem to be a healthy adjunctive treatment to people undergoing chemotherapy or radiation to protect their immune system so that it doesn't just plummet. It's not a treatment for cancer. It's an adjuvant treatment, again, trying to help prevent that immune suppression that can happen. So I'm very intrigued by it. And then it also has some benefit for, energy and people who feel physically tired. Reishi can be used to help support that energy while promoting calmness. So I love reishi. I think reishi is amazing. So it's a top one. If I was going to pick another one that I think is interesting, it's lion's mane.
Before you do that, let me spell reishi for our listeners. If they want to look it up, it's Reishi. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, and on to the next mushroom.
I just wanted to mention another one called lion's mane. Just like it sounds, the big lion and like a mane on a horse, lion's mane. This is popping up in a lot of restaurants, and you can get it at our local Whole Foods. this lion's mane mushroom is so beautiful. I mean, it looks kind of like a shaggy kind of, icicle. It's just so pretty. It looks so different than most other mushrooms. And the reason I'm intrigued by it is that there's some really interesting research looking about its potential benefit on the brain and the nervous system. Couple things we know is that there's some compounds in this mushroom that stimulate something called nerve growth factor, which is really important for maintaining a healthy brain and a healthy nervous system. It also has a very protective effect on the myelin. Myelin sheaths, these are what surround our nerves, and they provide support and protection and nourishment for the nerve cells. As a daughter of somebody who, my mother had dementia, I'm always intrigued when we're looking at things that could be consumed in the diet that may have a protective effect for the brain. And finally, lion's mane, we know, is a wonderful prebiotic, and it's very gastroprotective. So it's very useful in people that have poor digestion function. It's often recommended for people who have inflammation in the colon, etc. But it's a wonderful, wonderful edible mushroom that people can easily add to their diet to get these benefits.
Dr. Lodog, you mentioned cancer, and you said that reishi might be a good adjunct. Didn't have anti-cancer properties in and of itself, but might be beneficial. We actually have a question from a visitor to our website. He says, my brother has had stage 4 kidney cancer for 2 years. His treatments seem to be helping as the cancer has not grown. A doctor asked him what he was eating. My brother responded that he eats an omelet several times a week with mushrooms. He loves mushrooms and uses them in many dishes. The doctor was horrified. He told him to stop eating mushrooms as they dehydrate his body and are especially bad for his health. My brother has stopped eating mushrooms, but was concerned that he hadn't heard this before while dealing with this cancer. Have you ever heard anything like that?
No, but it doesn't surprise me. I'm sad to say it doesn't surprise me. We're talking about, probably button mushrooms that he's, including in his omelet. And, he's been doing great. So I'm not sure why somebody would want him to stop eating mushrooms when his cancer is being, it sounds like it's in remission. It's doing well. That the reishi that I spoke about, they think that it may enhance tumor response to the treatment that people are getting. There was a wonderful, Cochrane review that came out looking at this. And I tell you, those oncologists were just really intrigued by it. That one and another one called turkey tail, just like it sounds, turkey tail. And if you see a picture of it, it looks just like a turkey's tail. It's amazing. This is another one that is used extensively in Japan as well as in China as an adjunct for treatment when patients are undergoing cancer. And it's been studied, 16 studies in stomach cancer, 8 in colorectal, 3 in breast cancer. There's been quite a few studies on looking at turkey tail and these extracts. And again, this is one that I think oncologists are also intrigued by. What I want to make clear is that what we know is that many of these mushrooms, they contain beta-glucans or polysaccharides, which do seem to have a very nourishing and nurturing effect on the immune system. It doesn't mean that they treat cancer. It means, though, that individuals who have cancer who are undergoing treatment, there may be a role for these mushrooms to help support their immune system so that it doesn't become overly suppressed. I am intrigued by mushrooms. I think that, when you look at the data, it's just growing and growing and growing. A lot of, all the way through randomized controlled trials. They're clearly much more comfortable using these in Asia than we are here. But as these integrative oncologists told me, we're looking for things that also improve the quality of life of our patients as they're undergoing treatment. The fatigue, the immune suppression, it can be overwhelming. And they had a lot of important questions to ask. And a number of them are recommending things like reishi because they appear to be quite safe.
Now, Dr. Lodog, we talked about reishi being used strictly medicinally. The lion's mane actually is quite delicious. They sell it in our local farmers market. And shiitake, of course, are the classic mushroom for a stir fry. So they're also delicious. Give us your advice, if you would, please, on eating mushrooms versus taking extracts.
Oh, I think, reishi is kind of specific because, it's like hard as a rock, once it dries, it's not very tasty. But maitakes and shiitakes and lion's mane, agaricus, a number of these are really quite delicious, and they have that wonderful kind of fifth taste, right? That umami kind of flavor to them. And adding these to the diet can just be such a nice way to enhance your well-being and your health just through the diet. Like maitake, we know, can be very helpful for blood pressure and immune system and helping maintain healthy blood sugar levels. So why not add some maitake? Also known as hen of the woods, right? It's a very meaty, savory flavor. And a lot of people who don't eat meat, who are vegetarians, love adding some of these mushrooms because of that sort of meaty, savory flavor that you get from them. So, there's no problem with using the extracts. And if there's a specific reason to take reishi, taking it as an extract would be ideal. But for many people, just adding some of these to the diet 3-4 times a week could go a long way to enhancing your overall health and well-being.
Tironi, we know that in Japan, for example, as well as in China, people do consider mushrooms an important part of the diet, and there have been some studies suggesting that they have metabolic benefits, for example, on blood sugar. Can you tell us anything about that?
Actually, a number of these plants seem to have a beneficial effect on metabolism, right? On our metabolism and on blood glucose. Maitake, for example, is widely consumed in Japan. And it has data showing that it can be beneficial in maintaining healthy blood sugars, right? As well as immune system and, blood pressure. Lion's mane, another mushroom, has also been shown to have very beneficial effects on digestion and metabolism. And reishi, I just have to say, though not a culinary mushroom per se, it was known as the mushroom of immortality. That was its name, the mushroom of immortality. And it was valued by the royalty. You'll often see in Japanese the royals, when they've got their long robes on, reishi are sewn. The images of reishi are all on these robes because it was symbolizing divinity, immortality, etc. The Taoist monks used it to promote calmness and enhance their meditation and a healthy life. So I would say mushrooms have a lot of benefit all around when we're looking in the United States with the diet that we have, and we're looking for ways to enhance our well-being. I think mushrooms can play a very powerful role.
Dr. Tironi Lodog, thank you ever so much for talking with us about mushrooms on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You've been listening to Dr. Tironi Lodog. She's a founding member of the American Board of Physician Specialties, American Board of Integrative Medicine, and the Academy of Women's Health. She was elected chair of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Dietary Supplements Botanicals Expert Committee and was appointed to the Scientific Advisory Council for the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. Her books include Women's Health in Complementary and Integrative Medicine, Life is Your Best Medicine, and Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and more.
If you would like to get my mother's barley mushroom soup recipe, go to the show notes for today's broadcast. It's number 1288. Now, Terry, we've had some controversy about her recipe. Tell me what the problem is.
Well, we did post this recipe on our website once before for a different show, and we heard back from some listeners who said 2 ounces of dried mushrooms, that's so expensive. Of course, your mother did not buy the most expensive dried mushrooms in the supermarket. She bought the least expensive.
But it sure is good. Now, there is some additional research about medicinal properties of mushrooms from the last few years. What have you learned?
Well, among other things, lion's mane mushrooms have been considered as possible neuroprotective agents, and they might help us maintain cognitive function or ward off depression. And there's also some evidence that they may have anti-tumor and anti-inflammatory activity. If you'd like to look the research up, we invite you to check PubMed. You might want to know the scientific names for these mushrooms. Lion's mane is Hericium erinaceus. Reishi mushroom is Ganoderma lucidum. And we'll put in some links from our website.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio and WUNC with the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Cocoa Via Memory Plus, a cocoa flavanol supplement backed by 4 clinical studies that show significant improvement in 3 different aspects of memory. More information at cocovia.com.
Today's show is number 1288. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. If you'd like, you can subscribe to our podcast through your favorite podcast provider. We post the show on our website on Monday morning.
If you'd like to add a comment about this show, look for the post on our website. Do you have a favorite mushroom recipe? We'd like to hear about it. You can enter your comment at the bottom of the show notes for show number 1288 under the podcast tab.
At peoplespharmacy.com, you can sign up for our free online newsletter to get the latest news about COVID-19 and other important health stories. By subscribing to the newsletter, you also have regular access to our weekly podcast and find out ahead of time which topics we'll be covering.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.